Good Mayit. Simcha on Pesach is a unique thing, a unique kind of simcha. As Gemara says that on simcha, the simcha on Pesach is so great that Paka Igra, it causes an explosion of the roof. Such a great simcha on Pesach of Paka Igra. So of course, in the year of Hakel, gathering together to learn Torah, of course, adds to the simcha and the energy of the Yontif. And specifically tonight, we're coming recently from the yard side of Tzemach Tzedek. One of the unique things we know about the Tzemach Tzedek was the unity of Torah. In the teachings of Tzemach Tzedek, you saw unification of both the exoteric and the esoteric parts of Torah. You saw both the Nigla and the Chassidus as one. And tonight, Ritz Hashem, from our various speakers, we're going to see the same kind of teaching, how we see the Torah is really one Torah. A friend of mine made a chumash, and he made the chumash. Before he made the chumash, he consulted with me. He wanted to take a chumash with all of the explanations of the various tzaddikim of Chassidus. He wanted the chumash to be only Chassidus. So I advised him, why make it only Chassidus? Make it Nigla and Chassidus, the revealed part and the esoteric part. Now we can see it's one Torah. And Baruch Hashem, we have the chumash here. He did it. There's a chumash, you have the Rashi, and you have the teachings from the Rebbe, and from Reb Nachman, all kinds of teachers of Nigla and Chassidus. So that's from tonight. We're going to see the various parts of the Torah, how it's all one Torah. It says in the Pasuk, this is a Torah, Adam. This is a Torah, Adam. Just like a human being, Adam has a body and soul, so too the Torah has a body and soul. And so some things we see in the Torah from the perspective of the body, when you're looking at the Nigla, the real parts of Torah. You look deeper in the neshama of the Torah, you see the same concept, but it's in the soul level of Torah. One idea that's very relevant is the mitzvah of eating matzah. The simple reason for eating matzah, the Sefer HaChinuch says, is to remind us of the miracles Hashem did for us when we left Mitzrayim, and it highlights the emunah we have in Hashem, seeing all the miracles that Hashem did for us when we left Mitzrayim, and we eat the matzah, you remember those miracles. So eating matzah reinforces your faith because you're thinking about how you left Mitzrayim. But not all of us think about that. Some of us think about eating the matzah. How much are they making on us in the matzah this year, right? Some of us are thinking, is this really new matzah or is this last year's matzah? Some of us are wondering, is this the real matzah the Jews had when they were in Egypt, or did they have the Sephardic kind, the kalafa? So not all of us are thinking about the esoteric meaning, and so wouldn't it make more sense, instead of thinking about eating matzah and trying to remember the Exodus, wouldn't it make more sense to learn something deeper about our faith in Hashem, or to sing a song, or to watch a video about it, something that inspires your faith? Why eat matzah? So the Rizal says that eating matzah is not just something that's meant to remind you of something else, but in the matzah itself there's a godly force. The matzah itself has in it a spark of Hashem that feeds you emunah for the whole year. Every mitzvah the same thing. Every mitzvah has a godly energy in the mitzvah, and it's not just a physical thing. Matzah, we see this, that it's to remind you that we left Mitzrayim on the one hand, but deeper, the matzah itself is a godly food, and it gives you emunah for the whole year. On that subject, something that I never knew before, it's a custom to eat matzah among Chassidim the whole Pesach. And the reason is, as the Rebbe Marash said, that when you eat matzah, matzah is godliness. So eating matzah, it's like you're eating the manna bread. You're eating godliness. You're reinforcing your faith by eating matzah the whole Pesach, because you're eating every single day, you're eating a godly food. But I recently discovered that it's not just from the perspective of Chassidus. Also from the perspective of the exoteric part, from Nigla, is the idea of eating matzah every day. It says in the Torah, 6 days you should eat matzahs. Another pasuk says, 7 days you should eat matzahs. So we know from Rabbi Shmuel Levin that whenever the Torah says something and makes an exclusion, the exclusion is not just of the specific item that was excluded. Here, the 7th day of Pesach. Rather, all 7 days is not an obligation to have matzah. Only on the first day, or in the Rabbanan, you have the first 2 nights of Pesach. That's the only obligation. The rest of Pesach, it's not an obligation. You're not obligated to eat matzah the rest of Pesach. That's what it says in Shulchan Aruch. That's what it says in Gemara. However, the Vilna Gaon says that that it's a mitzvah, although there's no obligation to eat matzahs for the next 7 days. He says if you eat matzahs for the rest of Pesach, you're doing a mitzvah midaraisa. It's a biblical a mitzvah you're achieving. You're not obligated to eat matzah. Whenever you eat matzah, you're doing a mitzvah. That's what Vilna Gaon says. So everyone wonders, according to Vilna Gaon, so why don't make a bracha? Someone actually asked me, he said, what bracha do we say in the matzah today? Like, what bracha on the matzah? There's no bracha on the matzah. But he says, but according to his opinion, it's a mitzvah in a Torah. How is it different than sukkah? How is it different than tzitzis? How is it different than other things where there's no obligation to do, but if you do them, it's a mitzvah? For example, on sukkahs, there's no obligation to sit in the sukkah every day of sukkahs. But you say a bracha when you sit in the sukkah and you eat in the sukkah. Why do you say a bracha? You say a bracha because when you sit in the sukkah, you're doing a mitzvah. In a similar way, when you wear tzitzis, no obligation to wear a four-corner garment, but when you wear a four-corner garment and you put on tzitzis, you're doing a mitzvah. So if there's no obligation to eat matzah, but whenever you eat matzah, you're doing a mitzvah, we should say a bracha. So there is the answer of the Baal HaMor. Baal HaMor says this. Baal HaMor says, you can't compare sukkah to tzitzis. The sukkah, the Torah says 7 days you should sit in the sukkah. You can't say the Torah didn't have in mind you shouldn't sleep, because it's impossible to live without sleeping. You can't say the Torah didn't have in mind you shouldn't eat, because it's impossible to live without eating. So when the Torah says you should be 7 days in the sukkah, it also included that you should sleep there, also included that you should eat there. And therefore, that's why there you say a bracha. That's what the Baal HaMor says. So the Yechemed brings from Yaakov Zalman Brisk a very interesting answer. He says that there's a positive mitzvah and there's a negative mitzvah. What does that mean? Because the first night of Pesach, you have to eat matzah. The rest of Pesach, it's not a mitzvah to eat matzah. It's a mitzvah not to eat chametz. Now, technically, as Rabbi Shmuel Cohen of Vilna said, it's technically possible to have something which is not matzah and not chametz. Chametz nuksha, midrabanan. According to those who say that chametz nuksha is not asur deraisa, so it's possible you're using the 5 grains and you're not making matzah, you're not making chametz. It doesn't necessarily you don't necessarily have to eat matzah even when you're using the 5 grains. But the Sdei Chemed says this. He says a very interesting thing. He says the first night of Pesach there's a mitzvah to eat matzah, specifically to eat the matzah. The rest of Pesach you have to show that you're not eating chametz. How can you show you're not eating chametz? You show not eating chametz when you make something out of grain that's matzah. That's what he says. So therefore, it's not a positive commandment, and therefore you don't say a bracha. It's a negative commandment. You're not eating chametz. You're not. How do you express not eating chametz? By eating matzah. And therefore, although it's a mitzvah, you don't say a bracha. And Taka the Vilna Gaon, even though he held that it was an obligation to eat matzah every day, he didn't say a bracha. And so, anyway, so you see this idea of how it's although it's something we know from Chassidus, you're supposed to eat matzah every day, but you see also in Nigla a similar concept. The Torah is one Torah. We are now going to hear from our first speaker tonight. We're privileged to have with us Rabbi Shmuel Cohen from Manchester, who's a legendary Talmud Chacham, and we're very excited to have him here. And his goiness is only paralleled by Zanivos, so he's going to have to discount my introduction, but let's not waste time. B'chava Rabbi Cohen. B'chava. Come over here. Welcome.
Okay. I'll say a short vart over here. We're going to go through a little piece of Gemara in Pesachim. Understand it's a 3-pronged level of Machlekasan. Based on that, we'll learn the opinion of the Rambam, Shittas Rambam, and then it might be a bit difficulty might arise. It's in Pesachim Daf Beis. The first thing is...
You got to roll up the sleeves for this. This is going to be juicy.
When I learn, I need to go. Okay, so like this. The first thing is, the Gemara learns out, how do you know that chametz is asur ba'anon Pesach? So, Rabbi Chizkiah says, because it says lo ya'achir, it should not be eaten. Not only you shouldn't eat, it shouldn't be eaten in a way that you shouldn't have any benefit. That if you have any benefit that you could use that money or something could benefit from chametz, which might cause you to eat, is also to have. Rabbi Baal says, this is where we're going to deep in over here. deep dive. Anytime it says lo ya'achal lo seichel, anytime in the Torah it says you should not eat, it also means you cannot benefit from it. So the Gemara has a question. We see that gid hanasha is muter ba'ano. You're allowed to send it as a gift to a goy to eat. So although you're not allowed to eat it, you're allowed to use it as a gift. It's not. Even though the Torah says lo seichel. So the Gemara answers to this question that we find by nevela an animal that wasn't shechted, you're not allowed to eat it because it wasn't shechted. But the Torah clearly says, you're allowed to give it to a non-Jew to eat. So the Torah clearly says by a nevela, by a corpse that wasn't shechted, that you're allowed to benefit from it. So obviously, what does that mean? When Torah says you shouldn't eat the nevela, it cannot mean you cannot benefit from it, because the Torah clearly says you can benefit from the nevela. Therefore, Rabbi Baal deduces from this, when the Torah says by nevela lo soichal, it means only you cannot eat. It does not mean you cannot benefit. That's regarding the meat. Including in the meat, according to Rabbi Baal, is also the gid hanasha. Even though sinews seemingly you can't eat, there's no taste of basar, he holds that's still included in the meat. Therefore, when the Torah says you cannot eat the gid hanasha, we know by nevela you can benefit from it. So by gid hanasha also only means you cannot eat, but you can benefit. So just to wrap that up is, the way you know you're allowed to benefit from the gid hanasha is because gid hanasha, he assumes, he considers it a part of the meat, and therefore when the Torah allowed you to benefit from the nevela, he also allowed you to benefit from the gid hanasha. In the words of the Gemara, "K'shehut nevela he v'chelba v'gid hutra." When the nevela was permitted, so to the gid, the chelev, the fats, everything was included in the heter. The Gemara asks, so that's one point. So far clear? Okay, the next Gemara asks another question. It's like this. There's an opinion that holds that gidim, which have no taste, are not considered basar. So you're right, the nevela, the meat of the nevela was permitted to have, but the gid hanasha is not meat. So there's no exemption from the isur nevela. So if you hold the gid has noisen tam, so it was permitted. But if you hold ein begidim and noisen tam, the whole heter was built on this, that the boss that's considered basar. If it is not considered basar, there's no heter. So the Gemara answers a simple answer like this. We're mixing up two opinions over here. The opinion that holds that gidim don't have tam is the same opinion that holds that the gid is asur ba'ano. So, but the opinion that holds that the gidon has tam, so the gid is considered like meat. So when the Torah was matted in the nevela, it permitted the entire meat, including the gidim hanasha, and therefore, lo soicha means only don't benefit, doesn't mean don't eat.
How can there be argument if it has taste or not? How can they argue about that?
It doesn't have taste, but the question is it considered it has a dim tam? If you cook gid hanasha, is it considered basar in a way that's going to tassel or not? So it's machlekes in din, not a machlekes in mitzvah. Yeah? Okay, so like this. So let's just pull up two things. Is it okay if I stand up? Yeah, we could talk this. I don't know. For me, as a.
Look great. Don't worry.
Okay, sure. No, it's just. I don't know if. So like this. Okay. So let's have two parts. If you hold that, this is mamish, the crux of the Rambam's opinion that we need to understand. If you hold gid hanasha has taste, so therefore, if it has taste, it's part of the meat. If it's part of the meat, you will know nevela is muter ba'ano. So if it's considered meat, you're allowed to have anah from it. If the gid hanasha, the sinew, is considered meat, you're allowed to have anah. If it's not considered meat, then it's asur ba'ano. And the words of the Gemara, who holds that ein begidim and noisen time, Reb Shimon. And Reb Shimon tak holds it's also about no. Now let's learn the Rambam. The Rambam in the Perek Ches Halach Yudal said, Gid hanashe muter ba'ano. He holds Gid hanashe is muter ba'ano. Based on this, if it's muter ba'ano, that means it was considered at had a time as considered meat, and therefore when the Torah was a matter, the meat, he said, you're allowed to have benefit from the meat, you're allowed to have benefit from the develum. So similar according to this, the Rambam holds Gid hanashe is muter ba'ano. He should hold that yesh begidim and noisen tam. But the Rambam clearly writes, where it was? The Rambam, let me check. Yeah, okay. Perek Daled Yochel Ches. The Rambam clearly writes that Gidin is also ba'ano. Sorry. Perek Yudah Daled Yochel Ches. Yeah. Ha'oichel min ha'velo u'treifo beheva v'chat me'em min ha'oir min ha'gidim ha'rei ze potter min she'ein elan run la'achila ve'ein min starfin ha'vas l'kazayas. The Rambam holds that the gidim are not noisen tam on the same time, and if it's not gidim, so l'chor there's no heter. And nevertheless, so it should be Osir Ba'ano. And the Rambam is passing on the one hand, it's Mutter Ba'ano. On the other hand, it's Ein B'negidim and Noisen Tam. The Ayin Mishpah is Mitzayim, and in our Gemara, it's impossible to hold. You can't say Yesh B'gidim and Noisen Tam, and it's Osir Ba'ano. If it's Ein B'gidim and Noisen Tam, it should Mutter Ba'ano. And the Ayin Mishpah brings them both. So if you look in Kesser, the Magen Mishnah, he writes that, you're right, he addresses a question, and he says, well, in general, you're passing like Shimon, in this case, is a stam Mishnah like this, in this case, and therefore we should halacha, but then he asks, I will say later on, it's a stira. So he said, they're not tolu zeh b'zeh. That's what the Nenose Kenim say, that's not tolu zeh b'zeh. The L'chor in the Gemara is tolu zeh b'zeh. They are dependent now. So, what came to mind, I don't know if it's right, you need to ask those who know the halachas, the Kollel halacha about this. Later on in Chav Gimel on the base, this is in Chav Beis Amdal, Chav Gimel on the base, the Gemara brings a machlekes on Rabbi Yossi Aglili like this. It says about chelev nevela v'chelev treifa, about chelev, about fats. It says you're allowed to use it for l'chol malacha. You're allowed to use it for any type of malacha, but you can't eat it. So the question is, why does the Torah say a special heter for chelev? The Gemara answers because to tell you that although Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds that Gid hanashe was not part of the heter, ein begidim noisen tam. If it's not noisen tam, so when the Torah was matan nevela, there was no heter for it because it wasn't part of the meat. So therefore, you need to have a special heter to say that chelev is mutter. So the Gemara asks, although chelev is mutter, that's for chelev. How do you know Gid hanashe? So the Gemara answers, you're right. Gid hanashe should be asur ba'ano. But the Iboy saying my second answer to the Gemara is a kavachaymer from chelev. Chelev that's not on the shkar is a whole kavachaymer that we have that Gid hanashe should also be mutter ba'ano from a kavachaymer. So maybe when the Rama's passing, he's talking not passing not like Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Yehuda on Chab Beis Amad Beis, even though he's passing Rabbi Yossi Aglili on Chab Beis Chab Gimel Amad Beis to. I don't know if it's Oisgehalten, it's based on not the first answer of the Gemara. It's Rabbi Yossi Aglili arguing with Rabbi Kiva, which normally is Stam Halachic Rabbi Kiva. So he's arguing Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, according to Rabbi Shimon, Ibay Semen, maybe he has a special hat of Kal V'chomer. But if this word is correct, then we can understand why the Chassidic mission says that are not Tolah HaBahal. Because according to him, according to the Gemara Rabbi Shimon, it's either it's mutter ba'non, yesh begid noisen tam, or it's also ba'non, not begid noisen tam. According to Rabbi Shimon, you hold ein begid noisen tam, and it's not mutter mechlom. But nevertheless, there's a kal v'choyim from the Kollel, which is matter ba'non. Maybe that's pshat.
Okay, we'll hear now a few words from Rabbi Baitelman, Rabbi Baitelman. Rabbi Baitelman is learning in Yeshiva Timon Markazis, 770. A few words from the source, Rabbi Baitelman. Every year before Pesach, as well as before Sukkot and Shavuos, a lot of Rabbanim very often get the same call, the same questions every year from multiple people, which is either I live in the U.S., let's say, and I'm traveling to Eretz Yisrael for Yom Tov, or I live in Eretz Yisrael and I'm coming to the U.S. for Yom Tov. The question always is, do I need to keep 1 or 2 days of Yom Tov? As you know that on all 3 of the Shalosh Regalim, on Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuos, the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael keep 1 day of Yom Tov, and we outside in Chutz La'aretz keep 2 days of Yom Tov. And this question is always asked. There's a lot of discussions about it. If you live in Eretz Yisrael, where's your primary residence? Where's your family? How long are you traveling for? Etc., etc. Very soon, when Mashiach comes, we're going to have a very similar question, which is, when Mashiach comes, is there going to be such a thing as a second day of Yom Tov outside of Eretz Yisrael? Give a bit of an introduction. We all know that originally, in the times of the Beis Mikdash, or even beforehand, the calendar was decided it wasn't a set calendar. The calendar was decided based on the new moon. When at the end of the month, Basin will be sitting in Yerushalayim, waiting for witnesses to come. When witnesses would come and say that they saw the new moon, they saw a sliver of the new moon, that would be Rosh Chodesh, and that would set the calendar month by month. However, as we know, a month could either be a month of 29 days or 30 days. Let's just take, for example, the calendar that we're in right now, the month of Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan was on a Thursday, which means that the 29th day of Adar was on a Wednesday. Thursday was Aleph Nisan, was Rosh Chodesh, and accordingly, 15 days later, on the next Thursday was Tesvav Nisan, the first day of Pesach. So, in the times of Beis HaMikdash, the Beis Din would have been sitting in Beis Din already on Thursday, which would have been could either be right now the 30th day of Adar or the first day of Nisan, waiting to see will witnesses come and say that they saw the new moon, meaning that Adar is now a 29-day month. Adar already ended on Wednesday. Thursday's now that they had already seen a new moon Wednesday night, meaning Wednesday night, Thursday is the first day of Nisan, and now 15 days later it's supposed to be the first day of Pesach. However, witnesses didn't come, meaning the moon wasn't seen Wednesday night. So Thursday is still part of the month of Adar. Thursday is going to be the 30th day of Adar, and Rosh Chodesh Nisan will automatically be on Friday. Friday will be Aleph Nisan. 15 days later, on Friday would have been the first day of Pesach. The 15th of Nisan will be the first day of Pesach. Now that worked if you're living in Eretz Yisrael, not only in Eretz Yisrael, but you're living in Yerushalayim right near the basin. But you didn't live very far spread out. So how were they able to get the message out so quickly to let everybody know what days are Rosh Chodesh, whether Rosh Chodesh is on a Thursday or on a Friday, and accordingly whether Pesach or Sukkot is going to be on Thursday or on Friday, what day is Rosh Chodesh, and therefore what day is Yom Tov. So the original system set up was that as soon as Beis Din would announce that it was Rosh Chodesh, if Rosh Chodesh would have been on Thursday, meaning on the 30th day, that would have been a shorter month of only 29 days, not a month of 30 days. So as soon as Beis Din announced that the moon was sighted, today is Rosh Chodesh, they would start lighting bonfires on the highest mountaintops near Yerushalayim. And they set up a whole system where all throughout Eretz Yisrael, across every mountaintop throughout Eretz Yisrael, there were people waiting with bonfires set up, ready to light the fire. And as soon as they saw the fire in Yerushalayim, they would light their fire. And then the next people waiting for them. It was a whole chain of communication where everybody, when the watchman on his mountain saw the fire was lit, so he knew that Beis Din had said that today, Thursday, Rosh Chodesh, he would light his bonfire, and it would spread rapidly throughout Eretz Yisrael, and even past Eretz Yisrael, so right away everybody knew what the Rosh Chodesh is. And this system worked for many years.
It wasn't just bonfires, right? There was then shluchim also to travel.
Well, at first it was solely bonfires, which if you have a large bonfire on the top of the mountain, it could be seen from miles away. And this system worked for many years. However, came along the Kusim, who were a group of people that weren't such fans
of the Beis Din in Yerushalayim, of the Sanhedrin, and of what was going on. And they started making issues. They started setting up their own bonfires and lighting their own bonfires on the 30th night of the month to try to confuse the Yidden around Eretz Yisrael. They would light bonfires, even if Beis Din hadn't decided it was their Shchedesh. And now suddenly throughout Eretz Yisrael, the messages would start passing, and people would mistakenly think that Adar was in such a scenario that Adar was only 29 days, and therefore Rosh Chodesh was on Thursday, and Pesach will be on Thursday, when really it's false that Pesach wasn't really, that Rosh Chodesh wasn't until Friday, and Pesach wasn't until Friday. So Beis Din set up a system of messengers, as Rabbi Levin said, of shluchim, where they would have many shluchim waiting in Yerushalayim, and as soon as Beis Din decided what their Rosh Chodesh is, whether Rosh Chodesh was on Thursday or on Friday, they would immediately send out messengers to travel throughout Eretz Yisrael and beyond, throughout Chutz Aretz, where either were living, to spread the message about what their Rosh Chodesh was. However, travel takes time. Unlike bonfires, where as soon as it could travel within moments, within minutes, within hours, where as soon as one bonfire is lit, the next one sees it and he lights it, which again, like I said, on top of a mountaintop, you can see from miles away, especially if it's a large fire. Travel takes time, especially back then. So there were certain places, possibly in Eretz Yisrael, but for sure outside of Eretz Yisrael, where the messengers wouldn't be able to reach within the 2 weeks needed between Rosh Chodesh Nisan and Pesach, or between Rosh Chodesh Tishrei and Sukkot. So the Yidden that lived in these far out places, the Yidden that weren't able to get the message in time about what day was the Shadish and accordingly what day they should keep the Yom Tif, they would keep 2 days of Yom Tif. In our scenario, they weren't sure if Rosh Chodesh was going to be if Adar will be 29 days, meaning Rosh Chodesh is on Thursday and Pesach will be on Thursday, or possibly Adar will be 30 days, Rosh Chodesh will be on Friday, and Pesach will be on Friday. So therefore they would keep 2 days of Yom Tif. Both Thursday and Friday would be treated as a day of Pesach, and therefore they would have 2 days of Yom Tif. They would make 2 Pesach Sdarim and the like. Now, even after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and even after the Sanhedrin had to leave Yerushalayim, was no longer able to establish the calendar, and instead we went according to the calendar that I believe Hillel Zaken established, a set calendar that we have for thousands of years in advance. At this point, you just okay. At this point, you can just put it into the computer, and you could go on Chabad. You could get 3,000 years in advance the calendar schedule. However, we still kept the minhag of, not just the minhag, we still kept the halachas that it was in the times of the Sanhedrin. We had the Sanhedrin, which is that Yidden and Eretz Yisrael, who at the time of the Sanhedrin would know within 15 days what their Shadish is. So Yidden and Eretz Yisrael keep 1 day of Yom Tif. Yidden outside of Eretz Yisrael, even though now we have a set calendar and we know exactly when everything is, we keep 2 days of Yom Tif. Question now is, what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? When Mashiach comes, things are going to go back to the way it was originally. When Mashiach comes, the Pasuk says, "Vashiva shetayit k'vayis sheina." I'll bring back your judges like it was originally. The Sanhedrin is going to come back to Yerushalayim, and we're no longer going to rely on the calendar. We're no longer going to be able to rely on Chabad.org. And every month we're going to need to wait and see what's the base in Yerushalayim going to say. What day the Shchedesh is going to be? Is it going to be on Thursday or on Friday? And therefore, what day is every single Yom Tov going to be on? So for the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, they can continue as it was in the past. They're going to know in time what day Rosh Chodesh is, and they'll continue. But what about the Yidden that will be living further out from Eretz Yisrael? What about the Yidden that won't be living close enough for these messengers to travel and hear if there's going to be what day Rosh Chodesh is? So the Chassam Sofer actually writes, and this is based off of the Gemara in Gittin, which a lot of the Bachim here are learning now in Yeshiva. There's a Gemara in Gittin which discusses that really, Eretz Yisrael isn't limited to the borders as we know it now. Eretz Yisrael extends all the way through the Mediterranean, and any island or any land that's parallel to the land of Eretz Yisrael in the oceans, any of those islands is part of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore the Chassam Sofer writes, when Mashiach comes, and we're going to have control over those islands, and there's going to be Yidden living in all these lands, and these are part of Eretz Yisrael. What's going to be the din? A messenger won't be able to travel to the island within 15 days. Remember, we're talking still in the times of the Chassam Sofer. We're not going to be able to, the messenger won't be able to get there in 15 days to let him know whether it's Yom Tov or not. And therefore,
aren't there borders for Eretz Yisrael?
So this Gemara in Gittin actually says that the borders of Eretz Yisrael extend exactly parallel to the top of Eretz Yisrael, which is the Hara, I believe Hara, and parallel to the bottom of Eretz Yisrael, going westward. Anything parallel to Eretz Yisrael westward is considered, according to at least one opinion in Gittin, is considered to be part of Eretz Yisrael. And furthermore, there might be Yidden still living in Chutz Aretz, still living outside Eretz Yisrael. So the Chassam Sofer writes that therefore, although until now we call this second day of Yom Tov, the Hebrew term for it is Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galius, the second day of Yom Tov, which is Shel Galius of the exiles, because the only reason why I have this is the Yidden living outside Eretz Yisrael on fire in exile that couldn't hear the message of the Beis Din. When Mashiach comes, there's going to be Yom Tov Sheni. He calls it Shel Geulis, a second day of Yom Tov of redemption. Now that we have Beis Din again, now we have a Sanhedrin again, and now that we're deciding the month based on the sighting of the moon, and now that Yidden have control over Yidden are living everywhere, there are going to be Yidden that are living far out, and they're not going to be able to hear the message in time, and they're going to have to keep a second day of Yom Tov. So the Chassam Sefer writes clearly that there will be in certain places a Yom Tov Sheni Shel Geula, a second day of Yom Tov in the time of Geula. However, this is the opinion of the Chassam Sefer. Came along as the years went on. Actually, this is written by the Sefer. In the Sefer, when I tried looking into it, I couldn't find out who the author is. And he brings that these days we have radio and phones, especially now, WhatsApp and the news and everything with technology. He says there's no way that you can't get the message out in time. As soon as based in Yerushalayim is going to say that today is Rosh Chodesh, that Thursday is Rosh Chodesh, that Friday is Rosh Chodesh, within moments in the times of the Sefer Tchumen, he's saying over the radio. And by now, for sure, you can get the message across to the whole of Klal Yisrael around the world in an instant. So he says there's no reason why there's going to be a Yid anywhere in the world when Mashiach comes that's going to need to keep 2 days of Yom Tov. Because already on the day of Rosh Chodesh, he's going to know whether Rosh Chodesh is Thursday or Friday, and therefore he's going to know what day to keep Pesach, what day to keep Sukkot.
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah is a whole Rosh Hashanah. We'll get into that. Now there's one issue with what the Sefer Tchumen is writing, that we can rely on technology and on the radio and on cell phone and on phones, which is that in many things in Torah we need edus, we need testimony. Edus means you have 2 Jewish men over the age of bar mitzvah that come and say, we saw such and such, we heard such and such, we signed on such and such. Whatever it's testifying about. So perhaps when it comes to Kiddush HaChodesh, the same way Beis sent messengers, Beis sent live people around to bring the news, what their Chodesh is, maybe now as well, we'll need Edus. We'll need someone that can travel from Yerushalayim and tell us, a live man, a Jewish man over the age of 13, to give us testimony that Beis said that Rosh Chodesh is at such and such a day. So that's a question that some people ask, but the answer is very obvious. The answer is, we said that the messengers was only a second plan. What was plan A? What was the original way they spread the news of Rosh Chodesh? With the bonfires. Right? So if you could use a bonfire to spread the news and inform everybody what the Rosh Chodesh is, that means you don't need edus, you don't need testimony, you don't need live men. And just like a bonfire worked in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, so too now technology will work as well for us. So based on the Sefer Tchumen and using modern technology that we have right now, it would seem that once Mashiach comes, there will be no need for there to be a second day of Yom Tov, a Yom Tov Sheni Shel Geula, as some Sefer calls it, anywhere in the world. Now, as we come closer and as Lubavitch said, we would like to look and see what the Rebbeim say about this. So there's actually a very interesting sikha of the Mittler Rebbe, where the Mittler Rebbe in this sikha was speaking about the difference between Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Seder. We know that the last 2 days of the Yom Tov Sukkot have 2 different names, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Seder. They're not just 2 different names, but they're 2 entirely different Yom Tovim, and each one celebrates an entirely different theme. And the Mittler Rebbe in the sikha describes the difference between the 2. And the Mittler Rebbe says that the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael that celebrate Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Seder in one day, because they only have 1 day of Yom Tov, they're mixing up, I forgot, it was a good Russian word, I forgot the word he uses, vegetable stew and meat. That they're totally confused, they're putting it all in one big mush. They're Shmini Atzeres and they're 2 totally different types, and they're throwing it in together in one. And they're missing out, these Jews in Eretz Yisrael, and that's the advantage of outside Eretz Yisrael, we have 2 different days. One for Shmini Atzeres, one for Simchas Seder. Then it continues that when Mashiach comes, we're going to yearn for the days, especially when Mashiach comes, we're going to understand what Shmini Atzeres, we're going to stand up Simchas Seder, we're going to see it. So we're going to yearn for the days when we had 2 separate days of Yom Tov. Very clear, the Mittler Rebbe is saying that when Mashiach comes, there's only going to be 1 day of Yom Tov. Now, if you want to go further, and as Rabbi Levin gave an introduction about Nigla and Chassidus working, how Nigla and Chassidus help each other out, Nigla and Chassidus work together. The Alter Rebbe explains in the Kutei Torah that why do we have 2 days of Yom Tov outside Eretz Yisrael? Because every Yom Tov there's a revelation of godliness in the world. In Eretz Yisrael, which Eretz Yisrael itself is a holy land, and the people in Eretz Yisrael are on a higher level, are on an elevated plane of holiness, so they could receive the revelation of that Yom Tov in 1 day. But us Jews living outside Eretz Yisrael, we're living in a land not a holy land. We're living in Galus. So for us, it takes 2 days to process, so to say, 2 days to become Kalim, to receive the revelation of Yom Tov. Now, if you take into account what the Yalkut Shimoni writes about when Mashiach comes, that Asida Eretz Yisrael that the Eretz Yisrael is going to spread the whole world, is going to have the same holiness as Eretz Yisrael. So when Mashiach comes, the whole world will be at the level of Eretz Yisrael to be able to receive the revelation of Yom Tov within 1 day, in just one day. Now, when it comes to the Rebbe, there's a slight problem, which is there's 2 contradicting. The Rebbe says in 2 different sikhas which seem to disagree with one another. In one sikha, which the Rebbe was speaking on Shabbos Parshas Bereshis, that year, Shmini Atzeres and Pesach was on a Thursday and a Friday, and Shabbos Bereshis, and Shabbos, the next day was Shabbos, so Shabbos Bereshis, there was a Fabregin of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe was having this chakir, the Rebbe was so to say investigating. If Mashiach were to come right now on Shabbos, and when Mashiach comes, we're only going to have one day of Yom Tif. So it turns out that Yom Tif was only on Thursday, not on Friday. So Friday already was what we call Isser Chag. And Shabbos, which we're sitting now for bringing on Shabbos, yes, it's Shabbos, but it's not Isser Chag because Friday wasn't really Yom Tif. Right? Because once Mashiach comes, we know which day Rosh Chodesh was. We know which day Yom Tif really was. Or perhaps the Rebbe says that even though when Mashiach comes, we're going to know what day Rosh Chodesh is, we're going to know what the Yom Tif is. Once we as Yidden and Golos celebrated 2 days of Yom Tif, Thursday and Friday, so no matter what, even if Mashiach comes right now, today this Shabbos that we're in is considered Isser Chag. From the Sikha, what's the Rebbe clearly saying? That after the fact you can have this discussion. But once Mashiach comes, we know the Rebbe is saying once Mashiach comes, there will no longer be a 2-day Yom Tif. Every Yom Tif will only be 1 day of Yom Tif. And that's like we saw from the Mitzvah Rebbe, and that's like the Sefer Tchumen, and that's like what many others write. That once Mashiach comes, there's only going to be 1 day of Yom Tif. However, there's one more Sikha the Rebbe from the year from Simchas Torah Tavshim Memchas, Simchas Torah, the year 1988. And the Rebbe is in that same Sikha. The Rebbe is discussing the difference between Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, the difference between these 2 days. How these 2 days, although we always put them together, celebrate 2 very different parts of Yiddishkeit, and they're each a standalone Yom Tif and a standalone celebration. And the Rebbe says that Yesh Leimer, there's room to say that because for so many years Yidden have been celebrating 2 days of Yom Tif, both outside Eretz Yisrael in the time of the Beis Mikdash, and even after, and now as well, we celebrate 2 days of Yom Tif. So there's room to say that we will continue doing so even when Mashiach comes. There's room to say that even when Mashiach comes, those Yidden outside Eretz Yisrael, we're going to continue celebrating 2 days of Yom Tif. And therefore, those outside Eretz Yisrael will be able to have the Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah separately. And the Rebbe ends off the Sikha, the Rebbe ends off this point saying, and I hope that when it comes to the Kinus Torah, on the next day after Yom Tif, they're going to discuss this topic at length and try to discuss and figure out what's Taka going to be when Mashiach comes. Will there be 1 day of Yom Tif or 2 days of Yom Tif? And as the Rebbe ends off in that Sikha, that the Iker is more than the discussion, is that we should be Zeicha very soon, the Shiva Shetach for Yeshayna, that the Sanhedrin should be returned to Yerushalayim with the coming of Mashiach. And that year as well, 1988, was the year of Hakel. The Rebbe says that we should have the greatest Hakel, that the Eibusher will gather all the Yidden back to Eretz Yisrael, and especially now that we're discussing the Hilchos Mashiach, we're discussing halachas about Mashiach, as the Rebbe always tells us that talking and learning about Mashiach is what hastens, what speeds up the coming of Mashiach. We should be zeicha that Mashiach will come now. We should be able to have a heavy discussion with all the Gedei Yisrael, all the generations, about what we should do on Wednesday, Thursday. We should celebrate 1 day of Yom Tif for 2 days of Yom Tif. We're here to be made
Amazing. I was trying to point out that you said the Rebbe said that outside Eretz Yisrael were like a student who wasn't so good. He needs 2 days to process everything. The Rebbe says that you need a more gifted teacher for less gifted students. There's a higher source to the Yom Tif of the second day of Yom Tif. So Mashiach comes to have to say there's both advantages of both. Okay. But Chavod, we have with us Rabbi Brender, and we have 2 other speakers as well. And after the next 3 speakers, we will daven Meir. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, great. First, Rabbi Dovid Kahen has been waiting to get this to go, so Rabbi Dovid Kahen will go, and we'll have Rabbi Brender. Call Rabbi Dovid.
Shalom Aleichem. So over here on the second day of Chag, I was by somebody's house and he's having a barbecue, and the Baal he said, you know, this piece of meat, this should be like the Korban Pesach. So all of a sudden I jumped, I said, no, don't say that. It was Amaratzis on my end. Then all of a sudden, before I know it, somebody else is coming and he's telling me about how his grandmother used to have roasted meat on the night of Pesach, his great-grandmother. So with all these things, I had to open up the Gemara and Pesachim and see what's actually pshat and what's going on. So you see in the Mishnah it tells us, Makom shenagu lechol tzari v'leilek sachim ochlin. So in a place where they have the custom to eat roasted meat on the night of Pesach, you eat it. Makom shenagu shelo lechol ein ochlin. But in a place where you have the custom not to eat it, so we don't have roasted meat. It's too close to the Korban Pesach. And the Gemara goes on, Amar Yehuda Amar Rav, Asur lo la'adam she'omar basar zeh lePesach. So it's also for a person to say before Pesach, even on the night of Pesach, that a certain piece of meat is for Pesach. Why? So the Gemara says it's because it looks like somebody who's consecrating his animal, he's making his animal a korban, and then he eats it outside. We know a korban has to be eaten in the Beit HaMikdash or different places, maybe in Yerushalayim. Definitely for this person, if he's in the Goliot, he's outside of Eretz Yisrael, he can't eat this korban outside. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, you can't pick up a piece of meat and say this is for Pesach. Why? Because it looks like a korban. So over here we have machloket Rashi and Tosfot. Rashi explains and he says this is even on a shchuta, even if the animal is already shechted, you're not allowed to say this. And it sounds like it's any animal. So what's going on? And not only that, but it's mashma from the whole sugya. Tosfot says that Rashi is discussing you're being makdish right now. When you say this piece of meat is for Pesach, he's being makadish this piece of meat, and therefore he's not allowed to eat it. Now, Tosfot asks on Rashi, says, what's going on? You know that the korban is only going to come if it's derech ha-mitnadvim. Only if this is the way that people make a korban, then it's going to become a korban. But it's not the way for people to go once meat is already shechted and to say this is going to be my korban Pesach. So therefore, it's impossible. This does not become a korban Pesach. The worst that it could be is me'ilah. But even me'ilah doesn't sound like, because the Gemara clearly said, what's the reason for this isser? Because it looks like somebody who's makdish his behema, and then he's ochel his behema v'chutz. So Tosfot ends off and he says, no, what must it be? When the person says, this is for the Pesach, so in people's eyes it'll be lemafreya, that this must have been made a korban Pesach when it was still alive. And the Baal Bayit is telling me that this is for the korban Pesach, really it's a gilui that before is makdish it, therefore it is like a korban Pesach and it would be usher to eat outside. However, if a person would eat it inside the Beit HaMikdash, it would have been better. Mashenkin, according to Rashi's Pshat, and it comes out nicer with the Lashon of Gemara. So now there's big nafkaminas between Rashi and Tosfot. The way Tosfot's saying it, it's a gilui that this is a real korban Pesach, so that would mean that it's only shy to a gedi in its tzleh. If it's a young goat or a young sheep, a lamb or goat, which one is it? Tzleh? Lamb. So this would only apply to a young goat or a young lamb, because those are the only ones that are shaykh to be a korban Pesach. If it was a cow, for instance, then it would have nothing to do with the korban Pesach, and it would not be a gilui that this was kodesh. However, if you go like Rashi's saying the whole problem is you're makdish l'damav. You're saying that this meat I'm makdish for the korban Pesach, I'm going to sell it and use the money to buy a korban Pesach. So if that's true, the issur becomes much wider, because it should be shaykh to anything to sell it and buy the korban Pesach. So now we know that Rashi's a little bit wider, but we have our first kasha in the sugya. Rashi clearly said it's only shaykh to a behema. It's a behema ben shchuta ben mechayev. Why should it only be a behema? And this bottle of wine could also be sold and become korban Pesach. So maybe a person also shouldn't say that this wine. Taka, the Gemara says, by grain this doesn't apply. A person could say this grain is for Pesach, and we only mean he's holding it till Pesach. But Rashi says, by any animal, even a cow, you might sell it and get the korban Pesach. It's kiddush l'dama. So why does the Rashi say it's more in anything that's not a behemoth? So we have two answers. One of them is the Balatanya, one of them is the Magen Avram, and there are other achronim that say these as well. So the Balatanya explains that if something doesn't have any shaykh, it's the basar, so people aren't going to think that this has to do with being kiddush l'damav to sell and buy the korban Pesach. To me, what that sounds like is, if it's something that's meat, it's already closer to a korban, so people are already thinking of this. But maybe there's another answer. Now the Magen Avram gives an interesting idea. He says, Taka, anything else that a person would say, this is for Pesach, yeah, you might think that he really meant this is to sell and buy a korban Pesach with. However, if somebody sees you eating it later, it's not a problem, because they'll say he did a pidyon. Whatever the item was, instead of using that to sell and buy korban Pesach, he switched it, he was makaj something else instead of it, and used the other thing to buy the korban Pesach. So then it comes out, really, you shouldn't be worried about anything. Because now even that animal that we said to begin with, if it's a cow, so if you're eating the cow at the end, maybe it was posed the cow, you redeem the cow and he's able to eat the cow. So what's going on over here? Now Magen Avram explains and he says, there's another Gemara that says, if you're a makdish an animal, even if you're makash l'damav, it's going to get kedushas aguf. It's automatically going to go for a korban, I guess, if it's able to be, if it's roi for that. And therefore, any animal, once you makadosh it, even if you had in mind for damav, it becomes kiddush aguf. There's no ability to be podeh, and therefore, by any animal.
Where's this one?
I don't remember. The Magen Avram brings it on the page in Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, any animal that you say this is going to be lepesach, so you run into problems kadosh l'dama. So now, we said Tosfot says it's a gilui from before you're mekadosh mechayim, and therefore it's only shaykh to gidi and etzleh. Rashi is saying it's shaykh to any animal. The Alter Rebbe adds even off. There's machloket achronim. Does it go to a fish or not? And the Alter Rebbe says it goes to an off and it goes to any behema, that he shouldn't say this is for Pesach. Now the Rosh, he brings up something interesting. He explains the Gemara like Tosfot, but he says even in his places they were very careful not to say when they were cooking meat for Yom Tov that this should be for Pesach. Rather they would say it's for Yom Tov, even if it's not gedi, even if it's not flat. Reason being they were choshesh for Rashi. Rashi said kosher l'damav, and therefore even if you say on food that's cooking and it's a cow, this is for Pesach, according to Rashi, would be a problem, so they're careful for it. Now, Torah brings down Rashi and Tosfot, in the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, and he says interesting lashon. He says it's usher to say on any animal, bein l'chayim, bein shchutim, that you're not allowed to say basar zela Pesach. And the reason being, it looks like somebody's makdish behemto v'ochlo v'chutz. So now this doesn't work together. We said if it's makdish behemto v'ochlo v'chutz, it's mamish like a korban Pesach. That's only a gedi and a tle. So the Mefarshim, they explain, he's pasking like Tosfot, but we're still choshesh for Rashi, that you're not, any animal is going to be a problem. Maybe it's Kiddush L'Damav. So that's Allah in the Shulchan Aruch. Now it sounds like this is all past, but the Rishash brings up interesting ha'ara, and he brings from a Tosfot somewhere else, that when it comes to these chashashim for Pesach, might also be shaykh to Pesach Sheni. Now when it comes to tzli, that's totally on the minhag. If that's totally on a minhag, then you could say nowhere has the minhag not to eat tzli on Pesach Sheni, so it's fine. However, by saying basar zila Pesach, maybe you'll run into a problem, maybe not. But later in the Gemara, it says if you make an animal the same way that they made it in the Beit HaMikdash for the Korban Pesach, which means you put it, you roasted it all together without missing any aver, that's mikulas, and that's usher to do. So that, Hitaka says, according to one Shita and Tosfot, it would be usher to do for Pesach Sheni, which is still coming up. And now, the question is, so what happens if a person said, basar zela Pesach? Whether you go like Rashi, whether you go like Tosfot, does it become asur b'hana or not? So here it's a machloket achronim, and the Mishnah Berurah, so he paskins and he says it would not be a problem. With the avad, you're still able to eat it. Mutar b'hana.
Thank you. Now, I don't know if everyone here is able to. I think Ray Brander has to go. Probably. I don't think he's waiting for Meir, right? Yeah. Yes. I'll wait for Ray Brander, then we'll go and we'll continue after Meir. Call Ray Brander.
Maybe they make a small mark, so anybody wants to meet.
It's not a small. It's already a small layla, so I don't know if that makes sense.
I'll be very brief.
Is mine across street 8:30?
Okay. Meir across street 8:35. What time is Meir been linked?
9:35, 10:30, 11:15. Okay, the Shus Marda'asu of Baruch Hashem. It's beautiful to have such a maimed. This is we know that there's Sudas Moshiach, these Inyanim are happening around now, Pesach, and when we bring together the Litvish Olam and the Chassidic Olam, and they're all together, that Be'ez Hashem should be a school of Be'ez Hashem to bring Moshiach.
Amen.
It's a big cover to be here. It's a big cover to be here among Chaverim. I want to share with you just a regesh. The beautiful Talmudic Chachamim here shared beautiful, deep machshavas. I wanted to share something a little bit. That's not a lumdish stickle. It's just a little bit of a regesh in terms of maybe hashkafa of Pesach. We know that the mitzvah, the first mitzvah that Klal Yisrael was given was the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadashim, the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. And that mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh was actually given to Klal Yisrael when they were in Mitzrayim. Sounds interesting. It's given in Mitzrayim. And that mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh then yielded the Indian of Korban Pesach. That's Mamish in Perek Yud Beis in Shmos. And it's also interesting to point out in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, that Beis and Beis, Gimel and Beis, when it talks about Beis and Aleph, the Mishnah says on Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we are moneh for the Melachim. the Malchei Yisrael have every year when they get to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it's a new year. So somebody could have been Nagid Chizkiyahu could have been anointed in Adar, and then already by Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it's already the second year. So the Gemara asks, what's the Mikar of that din? What's the source that we start that Malchei Yisrael count by Nisan, Chodesh Nisan? Anybody know what the Gemara says? It's not a Bechina. The Gemara says, because by Shlomo HaMelech, by the time of the Mishkan, the Gemara, the Navi says, 480 years from the time that Shlomo HaMelech built the Mishkan, 480 years from the time that they left Mitzrayim. He became the Melech 480 years from the time that they left Mitzrayim, and that was around the time that they built the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash rather. So the Gemara says, Hukash, the Malchus of Shlomo was Hukash to Yetzias Mitzrayim. In other words, the din of a Chodesh Hazel Lachem, which is the halacha that Klal Yisrael is Mekadesh the Chodesh, that din also yields a din derabanan, which is, Pashtus a din derabanan, that we are moneh the Malchei Yisrael, Jewish kings, by Rosh Chodesh Nisan. What is the pnimius? What's the depth of that idea? L'cha'ora, one could say the following: that Rosh Chodesh Nisan teaches us that, in other words, Malchei Yisrael count from Yetzias Mitzrayim, because from Yetzias Mitzrayim we were all defined as Malachim, as kings. Every single Jew. I'm going to bring two simple rayas to this. The Mishnah and Arvei Pesachim. Even the poorest Jew is not allowed to eat, or he should not eat until he does haseva and the daled kosos. Why? He's an ani. He's not cherus. The teretz is every single Jew is be'etzem is b'nei malachim. The Gemara at the end of time says that if you're a few minutes before Tisha B'av and it's Shabbos and it's Shalashudis, every single Jew is allowed to have what? Kesudas Shlomo HaMelech B'Shaito. But my name isn't Shlomo HaMelech, nor maybe, I don't think your names are Shlomo HaMelech either. So why are you zochet to the Suda Shlomo HaMelech B'Shaito? The teretz is Pasha, that what? What's the teretz? No. Every single Jew is Be'etzem. Every single Jew is Be'etzem a Melech. And if you need a bigger raya than that, we're going to bring a raya from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because when Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the sneh, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this makom, the sneh, which is Har Elokim Choreva, we're going to have a sequel. And the sequel is going to be what? B'otziacha esa'am, ta'avdunas Elokim al Har Hazeh. And what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell Moshe Rabbeinu on the Har Hazeh? Va'atem tiyuli mamlechas kohanim v'goy kadosh. Every single Jew has a din and some level of a melech. And Chodesh Nisan, which is the Chodesh that were monef for the malachim, that were monef for the kings, it's not stam the Malchei Yisrael, but it's you and I. And if we understand this idea on a deeper level, we can now try to figure out a little bit Al Pi Hashkafa what's going on Pesach. Brachas Daf Yud Zayin Amar Rabbi Alexandri taught us that when we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ritzoneinu Lasos, Ritzoncha, it's our desire to do your will. Umi Ma'ake, what prevents us from doing your will? No, what does the Gemara say? Sar Shebe'isa, and what? And the Shibud Golios. The Shibud Golios meaning to haste the pshat that what? On the outside, when Shlomo HaMelech, we spoke about it before, when Shlomo HaMelech writes in Shir HaShirim, in Perek, we read Shir HaShirim on Pesach, right? Shlomo HaMelech says, Al tir'uni shani shchar chores, shezafasni Hashem. Don't look at me as somebody that's black, that's shmutzik. Why not? So says Rashi the following. Says Rashi I know that, and the pasuk says, "B'nei imi nichoru bi." B'nei imi means my siblings, the sons of my mother, my siblings. Rashi says the Erev Rav and others nichoru bi. They ripped into me and they have degraded me, and they look at me as if I'm shcharchores. Says Rashi, I'll be the Medrash the following. Says Rashi, no, that you're misunderstanding. That lefi she'ein shachrusi v'chi'uri mimei imi ela al yidei shezifas hashemesh. The shachrus that you see in me, and Rashi tells us in explaining who are the people that are saying this, the Erev Rav and others, they are looking at me on the outside. Find the exact lashon in Rashi. Ki heim b'nei imi nichoru bi heim b'nei Mitzrayim shegadalti b'hem. I grew up in the Sheba Golios. Va'olu imi be'erev Rav. And then they came out with me. Heim nichoru bi b'hasasosam u'pituyam. They're the ones that enticed me to go away, Egel Hazov, etc. But none of this is really who I am. None of this is really who I am. It's only on the outside. B'nei yimini charubi al tiruni shanish charchores. What's the inyan of chametz in the deeper svarim? Chametz is a shiva golias on the outside and the sa'or shebeisa on the inside. There's an unbelievable Gemara in Nedarim Samach Vav. The Gemara in Nedarim Samach Vav tells us, this is one of my favorite poignant Gemaras in terms of explaining the greatness of Klal Yisrael. The Gemara tells us, so many of you are familiar with this, the Gemara tells us that in discussing the din of Nidrei Taus, Maisa be'echad shenodar mibas achos, so they wanted to make a shidduch between the uncle and the niece, mutter. And uncle didn't want to marry the niece. So he made a neder. He was madir hana. V'yechnisua lebeis Rabbi Shmuel, and they brought her, the niece, into the house of Rabbi Shmuel. V'yipuha, and he prettied her up. And Rashi says, what does it mean? He prettied her up. Kishtua v'hilbishua, a little bit of jewelry, nice clothing. Estes or whatever that's going on here, go couture, sneeze, stick of clothing. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, so that she looked beautiful. Amar Rabbi Shmuel took out the uncle. He said, Bini mizuna darta, is this the one that you made the neder from? Amar Lav. He said, no, not her. That's not her. It's not her. Sometimes, the way it works in social media, it's forget. They say, you sure that's not her? Okay, whatever. V'tira Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Yishmael permitted her to be with him. But Osa Shah, at that moment, Bacha Rabbi Yishmael cried. Listen to these words, Chevra. Bacha Rabbi Yishmael v'Amar Benos Yisrael Na'osein. The daughters of Klal Yisrael, the daughters of Israel are beautiful. Ela sheha'anius min avlosan. But what happens? What makes us disgusting? The anius. We are impoverished. We are impoverished by the gullus. We are impoverished by all the mixed messages. We are impoverished by all of the notions of confusion that the world, the B'nai Imi, the Erev Rav, Daika, the Taroves, and the confusion that's out there. Ela sha'anius min avlasan. Ukshemeis Rabbi Shmuel died. Hayu benos Yisrael nosos kina. When Yishmael died, the daughters of Israel, they lamented in a tremendously deep way, Omros, and they said about Rabbi Yishmael, look what he did for us. Rabbi Yishmael understood the beauty of the Yid. Remember, Rabbi Yishmael lived the time of the Sarugei Malchus. And this Chevra is really what happens every single Pesach. Every single Pesach, what we are told to do is only a mitzvah of matzvah one day, one to the Gra, maybe 7 days, but the mitzvah is what? The Iker mitzvah on Pesach is what? Is to get rid of the chametz. And it's not as celebrated a mitzvah. But that's the Iker mitzvah. The majority of the mitzvah is the mitzvah is tashpisu, and the Isser tarovis, and the Isser bal yirah, and the Isser bal yimatzah, and the Achorim trying to figure out the difference between the two are, and the Isser kol machmet lo sochelu. It's all about the chametz. It's all about the chametz. Why? Because many times we think that what is chametz inside of us is who we are. Rabbi Abraham Tursky, Zechet Tzadik Levracha, used to say, he told a story that when he was young, he was a chess prodigy at the age of 9, and it was Rosh Hashanah, and they had a guest over. His father was a Chashiva Hornsteiner Rebbe. He was a Chassidic Rebbe, and the guest was a rabbi, and the guest asked him if he could play chess. And he didn't think it was right to play chess, but the guest, the rabbi, says, isn't it permitted? It's permitted. So they played chess, and the father saw as he walks in, he sees his son playing chess. He doesn't say anything, and then that night he calls his son in, and this is before chutzpah was created, BCE, before chutzpah era. And the son walks in, and the son has an ema from his father, and the father turns to his son and he says, "Son, chess on Rosh Hashanah?" He goes, "But it's permitted." He goes, "It's permitted, but it's pasnish." Pasnish means, for you, it's not appropriate. So Chavetz Chaim used to say, when you give Musar, don't make the sin greater. Don't see of chet. Make the mensch greater. Make the person. You're above this. You're above this. And he just let it sink in. Rabbi Tversky reflected upon those moments. He's waiting. And then finally, after a few minutes, and he gets the message, and he resolves he's never going to play chess again in Rosh Hashanah. And then his father looks at him and goes, "No. Did you checkmate him? Did you win?" He goes, yes. In other words, when a person tries to, Turkey said he thinks about that event in his life. In his therapy, he used to always speak to people who were doing with the drugs and alcohol, and he'd ask them, "You know that there's in the kitchen when you're cooking, you throw out you throw out all the trash. Where do you throw it? Into the garbage pail." And then he says to the people, he says to the chevra, he says, "And you know that taking drugs and alcohol and all that is garbage." He goes, yeah. So why do you think of yourself as a garbage pail? That you put that stuff inside. And that's the yesod of the avoda of Pesach. The yesod of the avoda of Pesach is to be mashbis the chametz mibifnim. And it's a big avoda. And if a person is honest with themselves, very often the voices on the inside bring us down. And we have to really fight with tremendous reasons. Mitzvah habal yadcha al tachmitzen, right? Lashon chimutz. We have to, with reasons, we have to counter the self-talk. What do you say to the Rasha? La'afata hake eshinov. What do you mean hake eshinov? You'll go to jail in the year 2023. Hake eshinov. You hit the kid? My Rebbe in 6th grade brought in a paddle. His boys, you know what this is? This is a different era. What is this? He said, boys, it's the Board of Education. It's the Board of Education. You can't do that now. What do you mean la'afata hake eshinov? La'afata hake eshinov? What's going on here? So listen to this, and with this I'll conclude. I know I'm late, but I have a great story, but I'm not going to tell the story. A different time. But people are waiting. It's a tzar b'lechaim.
Chaim just told us we're neshamas, not b'lechaim. How can you tell us we're not ready for the story?
Good steer. So I want to tell you something unbelievable. This machshava was nischadish to me this year. A lot of the Sfarim say, what does it mean? Hake eshinov. Hake eshinov means that a Russian gematria is 570, Yadua, and the tzaddik in gematria is 204, Yadua, and Shinav in gematria is 366. So the trick is you have to turn the Russia, the 570, into a 204 by getting rid of his Shinav. The Shinav, Hake Shinav, blunt is Shinav, but what does that mean? Whereas blunt is Shinav, get rid of the 366 from the 570, turn him into a 204, turn him into a tzaddik, and then that's the avodah. But what does that mean, really? It's very nice, gematria. What does it mean? It means you have to change his self-talk. you have to change his self-talk. Isa b'sev harokeach and in Rav Levi Yitzchak B'ditcher, both, that the shin in the middle of the Rasha represents the fact that we all come from the shin has three ksarim, right? We're all b'nei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And therefore, if we can hakei a shin of, point out his shin.
Wow.
Point out his shin. And then you could transform the Rasha into the tzaddik. You have time for a quick story?
Go for it.
Okay, I asked him, you mochel me? He's not mochel. Okay, so, no? He's not mochel me. I don't want to be, okay, we'll stop here. Stop. Okay. Okay, ready?
Hakei Shina. Ignore the Shina.
Okay, so I'll end with this story. This is a very amazing story that my friend Rabbi Eisman from Pesach shares. It's an amazing story. And it really has to do with the chametz. Because Erev Pesach, every Rav knows Erev Pesach is crazy for the Rav, and there's a mechiras chametz in the whole thing. And Rabbi Eisman from Passaic, New Jersey, gets a knock on the door, and he assumes it's somebody, and he sees a guy who's like wearing his like cardboard yarmulke or whatever, like the whole thing, and he says, "Excuse me, Rabbi, you have the humitz here? The humitz?" So he goes, "Are you like the Baal, the Rabbi of the Baal Shmuva?" Like he's mispronouncing everything. Like whatever. I need to go to So Rabbi Eisman said, like, I'm sitting, I have like 500 mechshtaris, and he's running, and I said, can I help you again? And he does it quickly. He walks into the car. He goes, Rabbi, I have one thing. We'll call this guy Larry Bernstein. That's the way he calls him in the story. Mm-hmm. He says, Rabbi, he hands him a siddur, and he says, Rabbi, maybe you know who owns this siddur. And he looks at the siddur. You know how many rabbis get random svarim and shemus? That's part of the just like occupational hazard. People they leave off their shemus in various different locations. Mm-hmm. So Rabbi Eisman says he's listening. He looks at the siddur and he says to him, Larry, where did you get the siddur from? So he says as follows. He says, I've been holding on to this siddur for the last 41 years. He said, I found this siddur. He says to him, I found this siddur, and I've been holding it for the last 41 years. Maybe he knows who it is. He said, I opened up the siddur, and in it was an inscription by a grandmother to her grandson written almost 55 years ago. So Rabbi Eisman, who's a rabbin in Shul in Pesach, says, I didn't say it, he goes, Larry, where did you get the siddur from? He said, listen, he said, as a child in the Bronx, we only went to shul, and besides Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the day before Passover. My father would slap me out of bed to attend the service with cookies. Kinus b'chorim, right? Siyum b'chorim. And then the rabbi would speak Yiddish. He'd pick up the corner of his long frock. That was the mechiras chametz. And I asked my father, he said, in 1973, I'm riding on the train from 177th Street, and the man looks at me, and he shows me a small book, a menacing man. And he says to me, what is this? He demanded. I look at it, and I know that it's a siddur. And he asked me if I wanted it, and I said yes. I figured it's better that I should have it than he should have it. A week later, we go to the shul, and I decided to bring my siddur with me. After davening, I made my way to the rabbi. The rabbi's name was Rabbi Bick in Brooklyn. He's a very well-known Rav, Moshe Bick. And I said, Rabbi, what should I do with this siddur? Someone gave this to me on the subway. In broken English, Rabbi Bick said, hold on to it. You never know. One day you may return it to its owner. That'll be a big mitzvah. I soon forgot about the siddur. Fast forward 41 years ago. Last night, I couldn't sleep. I decided, for reasons unknown to me, to leaf through some old photo albums. I came across a picture of my parents and me on the day before Pesach. In the photograph, I'm holding my green siddur. Suddenly, I feel pain. I haven't attended shul on Erev Pesach since my father passed away 28 years ago. I call my friend Bernie, whose son became, how do you call it, about Shmuva? Bernie's son lives here in Pesach. So in honor of my father, this morning I came to shul to do the humitz thing. As I was leaving the house, I noticed the green siddur. I decided to bring it with me. So Rabbi, now that I've told you the tale of the green siddur, do you know whose book this is? Rabbi Eisenman looked at the man, and he said to him as follows: this siddur's inscription spoke of a grandmother's visit to America in 1960. It mentioned her newborn grandson to whom she has given the siddur with love and hope for him to use it. It is indeed a very touching inscription of a grandmother to her grandson. I knew very well who the siddur belongs to. Larry, he said, this siddur is mine.
Wow.
I can still vividly recall the day I left my siddur on this train 2 weeks before Pesach in 1973.
Wow.
This siddur was given to me by my grandmother almost 59 years ago.
Wow.
You cannot imagine the joy and simcha you have brought me. Larry looks at me. Larry breaks the awkward silence. He says, I guess Rabbi Bick was a smart man. I did return it to its owner. It took 44 years, but I did it. He was certainly right in telling me to hold on to it. I take the siddur from Larry Bernstein and move to tears after all these years. My siddur from Safta Chana is finally returned to me. I look at Larry and I say, Larry, I thought I was doing you a favor, but now I see what you've done for me. Larry, tonight I want you to eat by me. And he came to our house that night for the Seder. He came back for the last days of Yom Tov. Now he's wholly reconnected to his heritage. He did the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. I did the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda.
Wow.
That's what the Indian of Pesach is. Returning ourselves back to our neshamas and neshamas back to ourselves.
Wow.
Wow.
One more? One more? No, I mean, it's not gonna happen.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to make concert.
That's it now.
I'm sorry.
You should 1 second. Go ahead.
Oh, it's just Rabbi Levin and Robin here. Okay. So the topic of Chamar Medina is a very interesting topic. It's found in the Gemara in Pesach and Daf Kuv Zayin. It brings down, there was a Mora named Amemar. And Amemar, he went to a certain place, certain town, to make Kiddush. They did not, I'm sorry, not Kiddush, Havdalah. He was to make Havdalah. And they did not have wine. So it says there that he waited the whole night. He had no wine, he didn't eat. He waited and slept in fast. The next morning, they made a big effort to try to find wine for him, and they found it. The next day, the next year, he came back to the same town, and he started to, he asked for Havdalah, and that year again, they didn't have any wine for Havdalah. So they said, look, we have beer. Now it happened to be that the year before they also brought him beer, but he didn't want shekhar. So that year they brought him beer a second time. He says, okay, fine, I'm gonna make Havdalah on shekhar because this must be like their Chamar Medina. It's like wine for them, so I'll substitute it for wine. So the question comes up, can we make Havdalah, can we make Kiddush on things that are not wine? So from the Gemara, it was only talking about a scenario that has to do with Havdalah. And it says that after the Shas Chag, Amemar saw that nobody has wine available, so he saw that the important beverages can substitute in place of wine. And therefore you can use that in place of for Havdalah. So the question comes, can you make Chamar Medina, which we need to define what is Chamar Medina, but can you use substitutes of wine for Kiddush and other things as well? And then I guess the second question, what exactly is Chamar Medina? The Gemara gave an example of shekhar, beer. Does it apply to other things in addition to that? So the Alter Rebbe in Reish Chaim Days, Siv Yud, he brings an argument. The first opinion says that if the wine grows readily available in the whole town, and that's like the beverage that everyone would apparently have access to, so then automatically you can't use any other beverage because wine is readily, since wine is very, very available, so you can use, and if you only don't have any wine available, then only then and then you could make assumably Kiddush, but for sure Havdalah on Chamar Medina. The other opinion argues, it says, if you have wine, no wine doesn't grow there, but you can find it in a store. You could go to a store I mean, you could get kosher wine in almost any place in the world today, but let's just assume in that place where you are, it's available. So then automatically you have no dispensation. You're not allowed to go after Chamar Medina. You could only use wine. And the Alter Rebbe says, although that's the Rashban, by the way, the second view, although we should probably follow that view, the minig is to be lenient, that even if wine is available in the stores, but bottom line, if it doesn't grow readily available, then automatically people can find a default beverage called Chamar Medina. So that's what Alter Rebbe says the minig is.
What does it mean that readily, if it's in the store, what does it mean that readily?
Meaning it's not in my house, it's not with me right now, I don't have to go out of my way, especially if it's expensive. Okay. So now, with that said, there is a question, what constitutes Chamar Medina? What is the substitute default beverage that goes in place of wine? So, from the wording of the Alter Rebbe, he says that the derech roiv ansheir likvos sudaseim al shecher. So people, why do they use beer? Because that was what they would set their meal on. People would go, they want to honor somebody, come, let's have beer together or something like that. So then that becomes Chamar Medina. And automatically, if you don't have wine available, at least certainly for Havdalah, we'll talk about Kiddush in a moment, you could use it for that. And now, what about things that are not beer? So the discussions are, let's say, popular drinks. So popular drinks, you could say, are Coca-Cola or sodas and stuff like that. And everybody rejects the idea that you could use a popular drink as a substitute default drink for Chamar Medina. You can't use Coca-Cola or orange juice or stuff like that, just even if they're popular, because it's not have anything to do with popularity. It has to do with chashivas. They call it light beverages. Light beverages is because you drink them when you're thirsty. Chamar Medina is something that you're not drinking because you're thirsty. So for example, a person drinks wine to honor somebody. Maybe they'll drink tea to honor somebody. Notice that tea, as Poskim point out, is not to be drunk cold. It needs to be warm. Because it doesn't have that effect on your body when it's cold. And so too with coffee. The reason that we could assume that maybe tea and coffee could have a status of Chamar Medina, substitute default of the wine, is because it's served warm. So V'meila, let's say I'm Motzi Shabbat, I finished my bottle of wine, that one bottle, and now, so a lot of people make the mistake, they go, let's just take some tea bags, I want to drink a revis for the Havdalah, I'll just make on a cold tea. So B'Pashtus it's not allowed, because it's not Chamar Medina, there's no chashivas, just take a cold tea bag and throw it in some water and make a Havdalah. It's not, there's no chashivas in it, and that's one of the purposes that you honor people, come and let's drink together. So it should be warm. On the other hand, have it very hot would be a problem, because then you won't even be able to drink a revis or mulo lugma, even though b'diavad by Havdalah we can be a little lenient sometimes. But preferably you should have at least mulo lugma. And because you're doing bracha chorona, you need to have a revis in that case. So when it comes to Havdalah, the poskim say warm coffee and warm tea could work for Chamar Medina, not cold. And pashtus, definitely hot would you have to let it cool off or put some water. Okay. Now, what about, some poskim talk about milk, but that's vast majority of poskim reject it. The Rebbe even says it's so questionable to even assume that milk is a beverage of Chamar Medina. Now let's move to the next point, which is, now, Chamar Medina is not actually mentioned in the Gemara in anything other than the reference of Havdalah. So now, can we actually apply it to Friday night? Let's say I don't have wine to make Kiddush on. Can I take hot coffee, or warm coffee, I guess, or warm tea? Can I use beer for Kiddush on Friday night? So you have the Rambam, and the Rambam says absolutely not. I'm sorry. He says, yes, Havdalah is the only mention of where we use Chamar Medina, but mainly you can't use it for Kiddush, period. However, you have the opinion of the Rosh, Rabbi Asher, and he says that you are allowed to he makes a pshara, he says you could do Kiddush B'Yom with Chamar Medina, but you can't use it for Havdalah. You can't do it Friday night, sorry about that. If you have nothing to do, so he says very simple, make Kiddush on bread. You have no wine, so make Kiddush on bread. And then with regard Kiddush B'Yom, since it's not such a heel, you've already mekadosh the Shabbos on the night before. So you'll make Kiddush B'Yom with Chamar Medina, beer, and maybe some other possible beverages. Agav, to mention that Sfardim, those who follow Rabbi Vadia in Yabia Omer, he wants to qualify it that he wouldn't use tea or coffee. He says it has to be an alcoholic beverage. It doesn't have to be wine per se, but it would have to have alcohol. And other than that, he would say it wouldn't qualify. I guess people also understand that, because if you're inviting people over, once it has alcohol, all right, there's age limit and this and that, okay, it costs more money. So that can make sense. But primarily Ashkenazim and others, and the Alter Rebbe, and we have a story where you make Havdalah on coffee. So those, Pashas, Ashkenaz, Chabad, they would be able to use other beverages. Anything chashiv, anything important. Okay, so now that leads to so you have the Rosh. He says, no, you can do Chamar Medina during Kiddush B'Yom, and you can also do it for Havdalah. But of course, according to all the opinions, that is only when you have no other option, because mitzvah min muchor, you should always make everything on wine. And in fact, according to every opinion, even Havdalah, it should be on wine if possible. There's a lot of questions. You can ask Medina b'Yameinu, because as we know, wine is available anywhere. As you know, in olden times in Russia, when the Alter Rebbe was saying we're following the lenient opinion to use Chamar Medina, it's talking about where they had no access to wine. It was very, very difficult to find wine. Today, any place you can almost find some sort of kosher wine, or if not, it's not such a big deal like it used to be. So obviously, we should try to be machbar in this. And al pisod, and it's brought down that wine is the idea of bringing out sod, revealing the hidden, and therefore, of course, it's better, and it has to do on Shabbos, that we should, of course, drink wine, and also for Kiddush as well.
And I've told many people as a school for their eyesight and other things to use wine.
For Kiddush, right? And also Avdal. Okay. I'll finish with one last thing. In the Parsha Shmini, Tafshin Chav Gimel, the Rebbe spoke about Yain v'sheichal, tesh, don't drink, whatever it's talking about, kohen, going into getting drunk, and then going into like the mikdash, etc. So the Rebbe at that Sicha in Tafshin Chav Gimel, 1973, I guess, 63, sorry, spoke about the importance of not over drinking alcohol, which of course could bring negative results. And the question is brought up. The Magen Avraham actually says the yain saraf, which is just general alcohol, let's just say perhaps vodka or things like that, and perhaps it's a liquor, and those things you could make Kiddush B'Yom, you could do Havdalah, theoretically, I guess, if you really are iron stomach. But the bottom line is that he's not so in favor of it, but he brings a havamina that maybe you also after all, it's a beverage which has value, it's important, it costs a lot of money per ounce, so theoretically it should work. But the Rebbe brings by quoting his father-in-law, and he says that the whole purpose of I don't want to finish on this. The whole purpose of Chamar Medina is that it has to be valuable, it has to be chaviv, it has to be. You would substitute it with wine, even if, like, theoretically in your mind it's just as good in your mind. But since the Frierdiker Rebbe held that a mashke is a davar ma'os, that a liquor is something which is not something that we should enjoy. In fact, they say by Chassidim, they don't like flavored alcohols. If you just drink a plain mashke, whatever you want to accomplish, make it simple. Why should it be tasty? Watermelon flavor or vanilla flavor? Whatever, it's not a Chassidic thing. So therefore, he says, if you're saying that mashke should be a davar ma'os, b'meila v'pas, as the rabbi said, it's pasnish, it doesn't fit. How can you make Chamar Medina on vodka, make Kiddush during the day on vodka? It seems the Rebbe was totally against it. So if you try to find another substitute. Okay, thank you very much.
The letter writes, all those who waited to listen, and I know everyone's patience was Baruch Hashem extended. Baruch Hashem, amazing. Okay, why did that matter?